Hello there, and welcome to Autology, the podcast that brings you the latest on automotive technology. My name is Amit Pandey, and I am your host in our special episode of Autology today, where we will focus on the recently organized electric vehicle battery focused event in Seoul, InterBattery 2025. Hosted by the Korean government's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, and organized by the Korea Battery Industry Association, Korea Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, and other parties, InterBattery Korea is easily one of the largest battery focused events in the world. At the event, we get to see latest technologies around battery chemistry, fast charging capabilities, materials, components, manufacturing equipment, recycling, and several other pieces of the puzzle that belong to the battery ecosystem in general. Therefore, naturally, the event assumes a lot of importance as a long lasting and safe battery is central to the ongoing EV transition. The event, which was organized in the first week of March in Seoul, was attended by my very able colleague John Ahn in person. John is a senior research analyst for battery technologies at S&P Global Mobility, and he is stationed in Seoul. Hi, John. Thank you very much for joining today's episode of Autology.
Hello, Amit, and thanks for having me here.
My pleasure, John. I recall last year's InterBattery event, which saw participation from close to 570 or 580 companies, was attended by more than 70,000 professionals in Seoul. It was very interesting from new product development point of view, and I can recall a few examples like Samsung SDI had unveiled a suite of super gap battery technologies which included solid state, fast charging, and ultra long life battery technologies. The company had even disclosed its roadmap to the commercialization of solid state cells. Then we had SK On, which had showcased some prototype cells it was jointly developing under its collaborations with the US based Solid Power and Cyan Power Technology. Similarly, LG Energy Solution, the largest battery maker in South Korea, too had put on display a large portfolio of battery cell prototypes across multiple chemistries at the event last year. So, John, can you please tell us a bit about your first impression of the event this year? What was the general focus areas of major companies that participated, and what was the general sentiment at the event that you observed?
Well, my initial impression of this year's event was simply the growing scale. The event has really grown year on year. Last year, 579 companies participated. This year, there were 688 companies from 13 countries. That's about a 20% increase from last year. From what I observed, the event's main focus could be disserted into two key areas: technologies related to battery cost reduction and safety. These are main factors in the slowdown of electric vehicle scales.
That sounds interesting, John. You're right, actually. Battery cost and safety are two key factors contributing to the slowdown in the demand for battery electric vehicles. I'm really keen to understand the focus on safety by the battery companies, given there's a lot of anxiety around battery fires. If I recall, there were some battery fire incidents in Korea a few months ago that sparked a lot of interest globally. Did you see battery safety technology was one of the key topics being discussed at the event? You can share specific examples, John.
Yes, absolutely. Not only the major battery manufacturers, but also materials and components companies showcased a lot of safety related technologies. There was a strong focus on thermal propagation and all solid state batteries. In terms of safety, the demand for cylindrical and prismatic battery form factor is really increasing. Essential technologies like welding and inspection were prominently featured. And on the material side, solid electrolytes for all solid state batteries really stood out. Among the material companies, I was particularly impressed by LG Chem's thermally conductive adhesive and their SRS safety reinforced separator, which enhances thermal resistance. by coating ceramic particles on the separator surface. It is said that the thermal conductive adhesive helps secure the battery cells while effectively dissipating the heat generated by them.
Wow, I'm happy to hear that, which means that there's a lot being done to enhance the safety aspect of the batteries out there. With cost reduction being one of the key areas of focus for global EV manufacturers, can you please elaborate on the methods implemented by the battery makers for reducing development costs and what you saw there at InterBattery, John?
Yes, cost reduction is the most urgent issue that needs to be addressed. Korean battery manufacturers are focusing on developing LFP and high voltage mid nickel batteries. Mid nickel refers to products with a nickel content of 40 to 70%. LG Energy Solution introduced a high voltage mid nickel battery using a precursor free process. Both SK On and Samsung SDI unveiled high voltage mid nickel batteries as well. This aligns with Hyundai Motor's requirements for economical NCM batteries. Additionally, material companies like LG Chem presented roadmap for mid-nickel and LFP battery. EcoPro, POSCO, Future M, and LNFP also announced roadmaps for mid-nickel and manganese-rich batteries, indicating urgency in advancing mass production.
Thank you for updating us on that. Let's get started with the largest battery maker in the Korean market, LG Energy Solution. Can you please elaborate on the key product displays and announcements that were made by LGES this year?
So, LG Energy Solution unveiled their cylindrical 46 series for the first time. They showcased three types: 4680, 4695, and 46120. This series is seen as a game changer in the cylindrical market. It offers more than 5 times the energy and power compared to the 2170 series. They also introduced their CAS, which stands for Cell Array Structure Battery Pack Solution. It enhances cooling efficiency and prevents thermal runaway, while also reinforcing structure strength.
That's an interesting example of a developing battery safety technology. You mentioned about the roadmap that LG Chem presented on materials for mid-nickel NCM and LFP batteries in your previous answer. Can you please elaborate on that?
Yes, it's fascinating how mature companies are really keeping pace with the demands from OEMs and battery manufacturers. For instance, LG Chem has announced that they will be the first in Korea to mass produce precursor-free cathode material, which they are calling LG Precursor-Free or LPF. They are planning to apply this LPF technology to high voltage mid-nickel cathode. By 2026, they are targeting on nickel contents of 60% and an energy density of 810 watt-hour per liter. Looking further to 2029, they aim to have a nickel contents below 20% with an energy density of 750 watt-hour per liter. Plus, they've already completed a pilot plant for LFP batteries in 2024 and are set to start mass production in 2027. EcoPro's roadmap is also quite impressive. At last year's InterBattery, they emphasized the importance of high voltage mid nickel batteries. And this year's exhibition, they unveiled a more detailed roadmap. In broader terms, for their high voltage mid-nickel single crystal cathodes, they plan to achieve a nickel content of 60 to 62% with an energy density of 200 milliampere hour per gram by 2025. By 2029, they aim to reach a nickel content of 60 to 65%, maintaining that energy density. As for polycrystal, they are targeting a nickel content of 60 to 62% and an energy density of 205 milliampere per gram by earlier 2026. And by 2030, they aim for 63 to 65% nickel content with an energy density of 200 milliampere per gram. They also showcased a diverse lineup, including cobalt-free cathodes. It's quite an ambitious roadmap they've laid out.
That sounds very interesting. Can you also please tell us what did you see at the Samsung SDI pavilion?
Interestingly, just a week before InterBattery, Samsung SDI announced the joint development of robot-specific batteries with Hyundai Motor Company. Hyundai's charming robot DAL-E was on display. However, the focus was mainly on prismatic batteries. Samsung SDI's slogan was "Prismatic is the answer." This shows their commitment to prismatic batteries. They are the only Korean company to commercialize them. And they demonstrate a video showing no thermal propagation with prismatic batteries. When thermal runaway occurs in a cell, flames are vented out and escape into an empty space in the battery pack, separated by an upper insulation sheet. Insulation sheets between cells minimize thermal spread and emphasizing the safety. Oh, and I should mention that while they focused on prismatic batteries, they also unveiled their 46 lineup. This is a 50 ampere class ultra high power battery featuring a tabless design that expands the current path, achieving industry leading output.
Prismatic is the answer, says Samsung SDI. I understand that prismatic format has some advantages over a cylindrical and pouch type. For example, if I'm correct, it is easier to assemble. It's predictable in terms of how much space it will consume. The size of a prismatic battery is pretty standardized, etc., etc. But having said that, cylindrical cells and I mean each form factor has some advantages and disadvantages. For example, cylindrical cells I understand offer more robustness, and because of that they can withstand vibration and shock, but at the same time they are relatively less space efficient. Uh, One very key aspect that I recently picked up was from this solid state battery technology company from the US. It's called QuantumScape. Volkswagen is an investor in them. So they recently disclosed that they've taken a flex frame format approach, which is sort of a hybrid design of the prismatic and pouch formats. They claim that a battery pack built using cylindrical cells loses around 9% of its energy density when assembled into a pack volume due to a fundamental cell geometry. Now, for our audience, John, can you elaborate a bit on these different types of cell design formats and also tell us if the Korean battery manufacturers have a preference towards developing cells in a certain design format, or do they have mature capabilities to develop cells in whichever format the customers want?
It's interesting to note that recently, OEMs seem to be shifting away from pouch batteries. They are moving towards cylindrical and prismatic batteries. And the big reason for this transition is concerns about the fire safety. This change highlights how important safety considerations have become in the battery industry. As a result of this shift in demand, Korean battery companies are striving to secure technology across all three form factors. However, each company has its strength. SK On has a strong advantage with their Z-stacking technology, which works particularly well with the prismatic form factor. In contrast, LG Energy Solution has a solid background in cylindrical batteries, having started their business in 1999. This experience gives them a distinct edge with their 46 series. Meanwhile, Samsung SDI has been producing pouch batteries for their Samsung Galaxy smartphones. Therefore, if they decide to transition into making pouch batteries for vehicle, it should be relatively easy process for them. but it seems unlikely that this will happen.
You said a very interesting thing here, John, that OEMs, it looks like that they're shifting away from the use of pouch batteries. And when you were saying that, I was trying to connect that with, the infamous multiple battery fire incidents that happened in the US on Chevy Bolt electric cars. And if I'm not wrong, the batteries had a pouch design format. So that's a very good observation, John. Let's come back to SK On, and if you can elaborate on what did they display at the event this year.
SK On exhibit a pouch, prismatic, and cylindrical batteries all. But the most notable thing was their immersion cooling technology. SK On's group company, SK and Move, specialize in lubricants. They are jointly developing this technology. Immersion cooling circulates insulating cooling fluids inside the battery pack to effectively dissipate heat. The refrigerant directly contacts the battery cells, suppressing temperature rise more efficiently than air or water cooling. Challenges remain in addressing weight and cost, but its success could lead to significant innovation.
You're right. This immersion cooling technology in batteries is very impressive. And I think it's also quite expensive at the moment. Um, but tell me, are there any specific updates to last year's product unveils? Like we saw a battery from Samsung SDI that had ultra long life, which they claimed would extend up to 20 years. There were a lot of other solutions they had showcased on fast charging capabilities side.
So, Samsung SDI had announced the mass production of a 20-year lifespan battery last year, but there were no updates at this year's exhibition. Regarding all solid-state batteries, last year they announced the mass production by 2027. This year, they specified the second half of 2027. And LG and Solution had announced their cylindrical battery mass production plan in 2024, and they showcased the cylindrical batteries for the first time at this exhibition. Additionally, they had announced a small high voltage mid nickel battery last year, and this year they unveiled a large size high voltage mid nickel battery, marking an update.
While Korean battery makers are largely known for their focus on NCM battery cells, do we see focus on newer chemistries this year? From last year's event, I recall Korean companies were lapping up to the lithium iron phosphate cell chemistries. They were developing solid electrolytes for all solid state batteries, etc.
Korean battery companies focused on high nickel batteries before. However, with increasing demand for low cost batteries, they are now developing LFP and NCM with nickel batteries. They are also working on next generation batteries. LG Energy Solutions showcased a diverse portfolio, including sodium-ion, bipolar, sulfide-based or solid-state battery, and lithium-sulfur batteries. Samsung SDI presented their all solid-state battery roadmap. They completed the A sample in the second half of 2027 and plan mass production in the second half of 2027. Recently, Samsung SDI announced an investment of about $310 million dollars in a model line for all solid state batteries.
That's good to know, John. Can you tell us if there were interesting products on the material side?
Sure. On the material side, the trends were similar to what we saw with battery manufacturers. Major cathode material companies revealed their development roadmaps for high voltage mid nickel cathode and LFP cathode. EcoPro announced plans to establish a value chain from mineral refining to precursor and cathode production in Indonesia. LNF declared the plans to start mass production of LFP cathodes in 2026, the first in Korea. Lastly, LG Chem completed their precursor-free cathode material. They announced plans to supply it to customers in the first half of this year.
Those are some good points to note. And I was wondering that how can we talk about battery industry and not talk about China? So I was wondering if there were some Chinese market dynamics that you noticed are impacting the battery market in South Korea. Was there anything specific that you can share on this front from the event?
This year's exhibition saw an increase in Chinese companies from 62 last year to 79. The scale of their booth was noticeably larger, and the participation of EVE Energy and BYD Battery was a major point of interest at the event. EV Energy showed the cylindrical batteries and prismatic battery. However, BYD Battery showcased only for the consumer product batteries. I think this reflects Chinese companies' efforts to diversify due to market saturation in China. And it aligns with the demand from Korean manufacturers for prismatic, cylindrical, and LFP batteries. Chinese laser technology is noteworthy. The growth of laser technology matches the growth of Chinese companies specializing in prismatic and cylindrical production. Given the lack of battery-oriented laser technology companies in Korea, I think the adoption of Chinese equipment is expected to increase.
Fantastic. I think that again was a very important point to be noted by the battery enthusiasts. This was a very interesting conversation. I can go on as there's so much more to cover on InterBattery 2025. There were some very important trends that John highlighted. But unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today's episode. A big thank you to you, John, for taking out time from your busy schedule.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. Thank you.
And thank you to all you listeners for tuning in as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode at our email, that is autology at spglobal.com. And you can find out much more at autotechinsight.ihsmarket.com. Don't forget to hit the subscribe, follow, and like buttons to stay on track with the latest Autology podcasts. And we look forward to you joining us again in the next episode. Bye for now.